Hello everyone and welcome to this week's game devlog on the Blue Dots Expedition, a turn-based strategy flight game. Here's a situation. A new enemy is planned, but it functions differently from previous enemies in a fundamental way. What's an optimal process without complicating the code that's already been made? Whatever it is, it's probably not what I did. Let's get into it. Before that, let's get smaller tasks out of the way. Last week, the new enemy icons were still in pre-production while I worked on their behaviors. Now I do have the enemy icons with their own animations. Their animations will play when the main action is winding up. Spawner enemy will begin twirling panels when it's preparing to spawn a new enemy. Railgun enemy will begin rotating its spiked sides before shooting its laser. Hardest one to implement was the exploding enemy due to constraints. Because I'm working in a 32 by 32 canvas for the majority of my enemies, room for expressive animation gets a little challenging. Subtlety with 1 pixel animations became more necessary. This is actually a technique from Pedro Medeiros, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, the artist for Celeste and Towerfall. It's a process of faking movement. Done right, you could get the most bang for your buck with minimal change. He has tons of great tutorials for pixel art if you want to see more, link below. Getting back to the exploding enemy, I needed to mimic its exploding and ticking animation I made in Blender and convert it to a top-down view. I did use the pixel rendering pipeline method in Blender, only to get a frame of reference, but still deviating it for the sake of clarity. Once I had that, I can really start to flesh out the logic of the railgun enemy. Currently, the strategy railgun behavior has its own little boolean to turn on or off when charging, giving players enough time to get to it, and for the planet to get away. When time runs out, it'll shoot a placeholder laser right now. When the players get there in time, the railgun enemy will tell the mission controller that it's charging, and then when players get into flight mode, it'll already be charging. As for small tasks, this was perfectly doable. And now let's get into head bashing territory. From last we left off, logic for each individual segment was established. As far as working together sequentially, that was kind of a challenge. For context, the missile has 3 segments at most. Each segment is separated sequentially from back to front, never in an instance where the middle or the front will separate first. Players will catch on to it, feeling the sense of consistency when planning their moves. However, speed will increase after each segment is destroyed. When players make contact, it'll report how many segments are needed from scene to scene. In on-rails mode, the player's ship and the missile are children of parent dollies, going forward in a straight line. Their movements are independent from the parent, which is propelling them forward, while players only have to be concerned with moving up, down, left, and right. On the missile dolly, there's a missile child that has 3 segmented children with individual missile scripts that have individual behaviors exclusive to each segment, followed by the missile-based behavior which houses logic that all segments have in common, like movement, taking damage, death, etc. And above it all is the missile controller, which decides the next active segment after the previous has been defeated in sequential order. Along with which missile segment goes first and which don't appear, it basically handles the encounter conditions. How does it get it from the strategy mode though? Basically, it talks to the mission controller, which is used as a container of sorts for holding the player's ships and the enemy ships that are involved in the encounter, and distributes damage based on the conclusion. Getting it to work with the missile is a bit different, because unlike the other enemies which have a lot in common with each other, the missile was built to work differently with its multiple segments, within a different type of flight mode too. The asteroid is the closest comparison, but it was still just one object all said and done. This is where things get a little messy. To make sure that it wasn't as terrible as I imagined, I reconfigured the strategy encounter data. These are basically scriptable objects I've been using to design my encounters with how many or what types of enemies are going to be used in any given encounter. One of the variables is deciding what enemy is going to be the dominant enemy when spawned. I added a missile type as an option. With some editor scripting, new variables will pop up when missile is selected, mostly for deciding how many segments is needed, clearing up potential confusion. In the strategy mode, like its counterpart, the segments are children with their own colliders that when collided will tell the parent object to make it stop and report to the mission controller. Then the missile controller will get the data it needs and provide the encounter details. Here's where it gets a little messier. Because of how I set it up, there were numerous problems trying to get the data to pass to each other accurately. Sometimes when just getting rid of one particular segment after one encounter, the sequence would go dying, strategy segment dies, re-encountering it, the middle segments fail to show, sometimes none at all. and this was due to my lack of foresight. Because I've reused a lot of scripts to make the new enemy integration as painless as possible to great success, not to toot my own horn, none of them have something like this where there are multiple interconnecting children. There was a lot of debugging, false starts, bad solutions, but eventually I got it to work. It's for tasks like this I like working on paper sometimes, which can free you up from the complexity already built and being overwhelmed. I'll more than likely be refactoring it later, but not today, or next week, next month, maybe. Next time I hope to finally get the 3D models for the missile segments in. I already got sketches and concept art done, but that's simple. The real challenge is getting the real behavior in, which in the strategy mode is separating the segments where players have to choose which one to take out first while the other one might get closer and closer, with their own particular behaviors and making sure the data is consistent, like what I tried to do this whole week. Think twice about building things twice, aspiring developers. That'll be it for this week. Let me know if you have any questions or feedback. Take care of yourselves and have a good week.